Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back with an action-packed episode just 2 weeks out from the election. We are pleased to welcome Ryan Wilson to the show for the first time. Wilson is an attorney and was the Republican-endorsed candidate for State Auditor in 2022. With Ryan, we are going to break down his recent op-ed in the Star Tribune titled "The Case for Choosing a Trump-Vance Administration," which is a direct counterpart piece to Michael's op-ed from August titled "My Time for Choosing." Then we will discuss Michael's recent trip to Pennsylvania to participate in a Republicans for Harris event where he had the opportunity to meet the vice president. Next, we will break down one of my favorite topics, McDonald's, and how it relates to the presidential race. And we will end by highlighting my epic week in our Pick'ems League. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to start with, so you had an op-ed recently in the Star Tribune, like we mentioned, entitled "The Case for Choosing a Trump-Vance Administration." And in it, we're going to have some healthy conversations here. You chose to write this following Michael's op-ed a couple months back. So tell us why you thought it was important to give a counterpoint to Michael's op-ed and why you decided to put this out there.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. And Michael wrote a thoughtful op-ed. I disagree with almost everything substantively that he says in there, but it was thoughtful and articulate, and I thought it'd be important to put another voice out there and a counterpoint to the points that he made. In particular, I wanted to speak to the suburban voters, that group of voters that seems to swing one way or another each election. And I really wanted to make the case based on principal policy reasons for why suburban voters should give a Trump-Vance administration a consideration this election.
Fantastic. And now you obviously were part of the Republican ticket just 2 years ago, have known deeply how Republican voters feel and what they like, what they need, what they desire when they're going to the polls this cycle. So you want to hit on some of the themes. We'll break it down a little bit further, but some of the main points that you thought were important because suburban voters are something Michael and I have talked about quite a bit of. Suburban voters are going to be some of those decision makers, and especially suburban parents, suburban moms, suburban women. So, what did you know? Is this something you've picked up from the campaign trail, or what was important for you to hit on when sharing with folks that the Trump-Vance administration could benefit families?
Yeah, just getting to campaign alongside the other statewide candidates and hearing a lot of the other issues and hearing from Minnesotans as I traveled around the state. In particular, I spent a lot of time in the metro area and in the suburbs, listening to kind of what their concerns are. Not all of them fell within the scope of the auditor's race, but I got to be there and really be an ear for them and to hear what they had to say. And a lot of the themes that I heard in 22 are still resonating today. And so there was a lot I could have written about here as you write these things. I think I was at 2,500 words, had to pare it back, but really focused on some of the main themes, things like the economy, the Constitution, crime. Those are First Amendment rights of free speech. These are the themes that again I heard over the last 2 years, and really wanted to focus in for people in the suburbs to say, here's how Trump Vance is going to make your life better on these key important issues for you.
You write, the stakes are high in choosing candidates who can promote economic growth, protect family values, ensure safety, and uphold our constitutional freedoms is essential. For these reasons, Trump and Vance are the ideal candidates for suburban families. Everybody likes a good debate, and we obviously have the two of you who have some opposing viewpoints on which administration would benefit these areas better. So I want to start with, because you do break it down into 3 points here, the economic plan. Ryan, why don't you start by sharing some of the points you believe the Trump administration has and would be most beneficial to our nation's economy and the pocketbooks of families? And then, Michael, I'd like maybe a counterpoint from you of where you think the Harris-Walz administration is a better fit for that.
I think I'd be curious to hear what Michael has to say about this, but I think we can all agree that a strong middle class is a pro-family agenda. And so that's really where I started from with this op-ed, was talking about the policies that Trump and Vance want to put in place to have that, to strengthen the middle class, to protect workers, protect job security, to help bring down inflation, things that directly impact the pocketbooks of families. And when families know that they can be secure in their jobs and in their future, they can start to save for things like a retirement, education for their kids. They can start to look towards the future and not worried about where is that next meal going to come from? Are they going to be able to afford it? And I think the best indicator of these policies that work is that in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, prior to COVID and basically the whole world getting turned upside down, we had one of the strongest economies ever in the history of America. And I think there are things that Trump and Vance are proposing this time. They're going to build on that, and new things that they're going to bring that continue to support this pro-family agenda.
Michael, this is something we heard a lot. I know Preya was chatted a lot about this post debates, but I know you certainly think that the Harris-Walz administration could benefit this area for families as well.
I do. One thing I want to point out with Ryan's op-ed is he's references the first 2 quarters of the Trump administration. Donald Trump inherited a booming economy and then proceeded to drive it directly into the ground. And so I don't know that there's a good track record with Trump's economic policy that he's going to be able to go out there and talk. What I think he's offering some contrast on is on matters related to inflation and prices right now. But Ryan's op-ed, I think, hung his hat on a policy which the Trump campaign in itself is not articulating. And I would say that the overall totality of Trump's record on economics is questionable. And I think he benefited greatly from a strong economy that he inherited. And when what the former president is talking right now about his campaign is in tariffs or other things, I don't think that he's made a compelling case to the suburban families or anyone in the suburbs that the Trump administration is specifically looking out for them. I think that what Trump is benefiting right now, the campaign wide so close in the suburbs, is because of prices and other things that have fluctuated recently and started to stabilize a bit. And so ultimately, I think on economic policy, if Ryan's op-ed was what the Trump administration would actually follow through on, I think there could be something substantive there, but I don't think they will.
We've talked a lot about how the Kamala Harris is currently the sitting vice president, and things have been a little bit tough for families the last couple of years. Do you think she has the economic plan that would be able to turn it around despite what she inherited or how things look today?
The number of business leaders in the state, the number of economists that have weighed in support of the Harris and Walz ticket, I think is pretty profound and overwhelming. And I think the other thing that I would say is their ability to focus on economic issues is, I think, what's going to be important. I think one of the things that's a challenge that I have with the Trump administration and the Trump-Vance campaign is their ability to focus on what they're going to do once in office. And so if Ryan Wilson was running for president and this was his economic plan, I'd probably be out there campaigning across the country to make sure was the plan, because I think Ryan laid out a very well constructed op-ed about how suburban families can resonate with this. I just don't know if the Trump campaign is going to follow through on it.
And Ryan, I want to get your insight on that because this is something that is my frustration with the Trump administration as well. I do believe that the economic side of things is something that the Republicans have a stronger standing on. I also believe the same when it comes to public safety, which is your second point here in national policies to reduce crime and support local law enforcement. As you're talking, I assume while you're not currently on the ticket or anything, you still have good relationship with voters and delegates, constituents, and just regular Minnesotans who feel these things too. Is there still that frustration though that the Trump campaign, rather than focusing on things like crime and economic side of things, do get distracted where that tends to allow the Harris-Walz campaign to benefit a little bit with their policies?
I've seen the Trump campaign be on message, and it's been a continuous message from the first Trump administration through this campaign, which is policies that want to bring jobs back to America, whether that be through tariffs, through tax incentives, through a variety of economic tools, but being able to bring jobs here first and to put us in the best position globally so that we can sell our goods nationwide. I mean, I believe as of today, GM and Ford can't sell their cars in Europe. Europe can sell their cars in here. And so there are tools that the Trump administration have been consistent about using, things like tariffs, to be able to ensure that we can be in the best negotiating position at the table. And so again, I haven't. You both have articulated that Trump and the campaign hasn't been on point. I've seen this as a continuous message that's been consistent through both campaigns, which is the ability to bring jobs back to America and really looking out for the American worker. And I think When those policies are put into place, that brings security to the middle class, to suburban families, things like the tax cuts. Without action, the tax cuts from Trump's first administration are going to expire, and we're going to see the largest increase in taxes on the middle class, maybe even ever. I know definitely in decades. And there are huge stakes for the middle class, for suburban voters in this election. And again, I've seen a consistent theme throughout, the first Trump administration and now this Trump campaign that again focusing on the American worker, the American middle class, and bringing jobs back to America.
Chat with us a little bit about the public safety immigration side of things. I think that this is something that is a bipartisan concern. I think that Republicans, Democrats, immigrant or independents alike have concerns with the broken immigration system and an increase in crime that has been plaguing some cities in Minnesota and around the nation. So talk to us a little bit about why you believe that is a top three issue here for the presidential race and how you think that the Trump wall or I'm sorry, the Trump-Vance ticket is the best suited to handle that.
And obviously, immigration has been a problem for decades now across multiple administrations, across multiple Congresses of both parties, and I think I'm hearing that people are frustrated with it. They're frustrated. In Minnesota, we're obviously a bit further away from the southern border, but we feel the effects of it here. In particular, what about this is the amount of fentanyl that's coming into our cities, into our communities, that's destroying a lot of our families. It's that, including the suburbs. This isn't just an urban problem, but this is everywhere, and our suburban families are being hurt by that as well. And it's well known that fentanyl is coming across our southern border, and loose policies at the southern border are directly impacting the people here in Minnesota suburbs. And I think people want to see stronger borders. And this ties with the second part of what I talked about in immigration, which is a humane immigration policy. And so, again, Trump, when he was talking about in his first campaign about building the wall, and one of the things he said is we're going to have big, beautiful doors in that wall too, because he recognizes both then and now that we have to have a process for legal immigration for people to be able to come in to be vetted, whether that be seasonal workers or permanent workers to support our industries. And I think that's well recognized across the board. And I think again, before you can have those conversations to be able to say, how do we have those big, beautiful doors so that we can ensure that the people that we need here in America can come to America to help our economy, to help our businesses. First, we have to stop, as they say, the bleeding. We have to stop the people coming across the border. Nobody should have to come to America hidden in the trunk or across the river with a child on their back in the middle of the night. We're better than that. And we owe it to ourselves and to the world to have sane and enforced immigration policies.
I want to echo what Michael said earlier that if we had a Ryan Wilson as a principled, focused messenger out there, I think that I agree. I think that is a worthy way of having a policy to move forward. I think, again, I don't want to speak for Michael, but one of my frustrations is this has been, we saw in debates and in interviews, a place where both Vance and Trump have failed to hold, I believe, Kamala Harris accountable for her role as immigration czar in this, and again, gotten distracted by the news of the day and what that might be. But Michael, I'll let you play the devil's advocate here. I'm just the facilitator. So why do you believe that the Harris-Walz administration maybe is better suited here?
Let me just say this. One of the reasons I think it was so important, Becky, that we have Ryan on, and I want to talk about this more before he leaves, but he is articulating, I think, and we've had other episodes with other guests where this is a struggle, and this is what we're trying to do in this podcast. We're trying to elevate the discussion, and we've had John Rouleau on, we've had former Senator Michelle Benson on, and we have the privilege of talking with Ryan Wilson today. I think Ryan is, without a doubt, one of the most thoughtful, articulate, principled conservatives in this state. And I was really impressed by his op-ed. He put pen to paper and laid out a really detailed position as to why he was supporting Donald Trump. And that's the type of thing I'm glad that this podcast is embracing, because I think just our listeners in the first 15 minutes of this are hearing a conservative talking about policies in a way that I think you and I would love to see someone doing that more. And I think that's what I want to do with Ryan on this, particularly this interview, is because it's so important that we have these discussions and we don't shout people out. I will say, in the spirit of the podcast, that I think that being said, I think Trump's record on immigration is inconsistent. This is someone who said that in his first campaign, said that he was going to build a wall and Mexico was going to pay for it. That wall was not finished and Mexico did not pay for it. He is part of the reason we have an immigration problem. And Ryan is correct in saying that this is an immigration problem that's gone on for decades. And I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have ownership in not getting this resolved and not getting a good bipartisan plan here. I will say that I think the former president did spend some time this recently nuking and preventing there from being a bipartisan deal that could have resolved some of these immigration issues. And I do think this. I think one of the things that Trump is very good at doing is making outlandish promises on the campaign trail and then not following through on them. And one of the things that he said during his 2016 campaign was, again, there was going to be a wall built and Mexico was going to pay for it. Neither of those two things happened. But one of the challenges I think that the Trump administration is going to have if he wins is he's talking about the largest mass deportations that this country has ever seen. And roughly more than 1 million people could cost upwards of $20 billion. And I fundamentally don't see how that mass deportation policy, when implemented, I don't want to say it sounds good to me. There are certain circles where it sounds good. And I think there needs to be a realistic immigration policy. And I think Ryan's perspective on immigration, once again, is framed through the lens of a thoughtful conservative. That's different than the Trump campaign. And so I want to acknowledge Ryan's thoughtfulness versus, in some ways, what I think is much more barbaric language from the Trump and Vance campaign.
Ryan, I want to give you a chance. We just have a few more moments with you, but to hit on either responding to any of that, but also your third point, which is support for law and liberty and defending the First Amendment and the Trump and Vance ability to do just that.
Hey, just real quick, what Michael said there. When people campaign, and look, I'm no expert. I'm not a pundit. Now I consider myself a politician, just a suburban dad who likes to coach some baseball, as I said in the op-ed. And so I see from a common sense perspective. But when people are campaigning, they throw out ideas and policies and broad statements to be able to communicate quickly to a broad group of people. How those end up coming to fruition in an administration, that all has to be worked out between Congress through executive action. Those actions are obviously can be checked in the courts, and so there's a lot of granular details that the day-to-day of campaigns don't allow for either candidate, either side, to really delve into. I think both candidates, for example, have talked about no taxes on tips, right? There are a plethora of questions that come with how does that actually work? How does that play
Yep.
out? And that's just not the nature of campaigning. At a campaign stop and you're in front of a crowd, you don't get to delve into those specifics. And so I think part of it is the candidates are laying out broad principles of what it is they'd like to accomplish it, some of the ways they may accomplish it. And that I don't get as hung up on the specifics of how is this actually going to work? What is it going to look like? Because that's for whoever ends up winning. And in my case, I think it'll be Trump-Vance. That's for working out later on. As they say, the devils are the specifics or the details. I do want to talk with our remaining time here, if we can, on one of the things that I think done well under the first Trump administration, which is protecting religious liberties, allowing people to live out their faith in peace without the auspices of the government and looking over them, but also the First Amendment, being able to go speak freely without fear of being retribution or being canceled or these sort of things, being censored. And I think since Trump left office, we're seeing an interesting, almost a flip, at least on the Democrat side, in terms of their view on censorship and the use of big tech to be able to achieve certain ends. And I think that's one of the looming things I'm hearing is important in the suburbs is how do I know that I can speak my mind? I can have conversations with my kids, with my families, semi-publicly, and be able to have these conversations so that we can advance debate like we're having here, like a wonderful conversation where nothing's been thrown at each other yet. And we can have that discourse. And so I think Senator Vance in particular has espoused quite a bit of that when it comes to speech on college campuses. And again, you can see the types of judges that have been appointed really uphold those First Amendment rights. And again, for these suburban families that care about both First Amendment religious protections and the First Amendment speech protections, I think Trump-Vance, when I put the two side by side, it has the better plans.
If I may, former president is openly talking about removing CBS's license because of 60 Minutes. He's really, I think, taken a direct frontal attack on the First Amendment. And I will also say, as a proud Republican for Harris, one of the things the former president is talking about is the enemy within and targeting people for speaking up and exercising their First Amendment beliefs. Ryan, one quick thing, I have more to say, but I just want to get this on the record. If there is some re-education camp, will you put in a good word for me and make sure? I don't think I would do well in a re-education camp. Could you put in a good word for me? Just make sure I'm on. I don't think I like my cell phone. I like my Wi-Fi, but if there is a re-education camp, could you just make sure I'm in a nice one?
I understand. At least having Twitter is going to be important to you.
Yes, Twitter is going to be important to me. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, in all seriousness, Becky, I just want to say this is why we do this podcast. And I think I think, and no disrespect to anyone else that's been on the show, Ryan Wilson wrote, I believe, the most articulate, reasonable, common sense reasons as to why he believes that why he's backing Donald Trump. I remain convinced that it was the most thoughtful, articulate position stance from someone as to why they were supporting Trump. And I think it's so important that as even though Ryan and I are disagreeing, and I know you're somewhere in the middle, but Ryan and I are certainly on different sides, we can have conversations and we can be friends and we can have discussions. And having Ryan come on and talk the way that he did and treat us with respect and us treat him with respect is exactly what we need to be doing. And I'm really proud of this conversation. Even though I disagree with Ryan, it was really thoughtful what he wrote. And I know in his heart, that's where he's coming from. And was a great privilege to talk with him. And it was a great opportunity to have him on the podcast. And I hope, even if I'm in potentially in a re-education camp, I can still do the podcast maybe, and Ryan will come back on.
Absolutely agree. And what Ryan will certainly link to your op-ed in the show notes as well so folks can go read it in its entirety. But I do agree. This is nice to have a conversation about the issues and the policies and less about all of the other things that there's certainly my frustrations when it comes to the Trump-Vance campaign. So I appreciate you being a leader, putting this out, remaining a vocal, thoughtful voice within the Republican Party here in the state. And I hope it's not the last we hear from you.
Wonderful. I look forward to coming back. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so
Ryan,
much.
thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us today. Wow.
We didn't get a chance to ask him if he's going to run for office again in the future. Man, we dropped the ball on that
We
one.
did drop the ball on that. What's your take?
Like I said, I think it's where I remain 2 weeks out, still confused about things. Like having a chance to just focus, because this is where my struggle is that I do believe with a lot of the policy sides that come on its face from the Trump administration and the Trump campaign. It's all of the other stuff, which we'll get into here shortly, that really is where I struggle. It's the insurrection January 6th. It's all of the offhand comments. It's focusing on tampon Tim and eating pets. And so it's nice when we can go back to old school campaigning, and by old school, 8 years ago, type of campaigning when it was focused on the issues and the policies and how it's going to impact our daily lives, how it's going to impact families and businesses and how we do business and our constitutional rights and freedoms. And so it was really refreshing to both read his op-ed and hear from him articulate those reasons that remain important when choosing a presidential candidate.
I have to just say to you that if Michelle Benson was messaging for the Trump campaign, if John Rouleau was messaging for the Trump campaign, if Ryan Wilson was messaging for the Trump campaign, or Becky, if you were messaging from the Trump campaign, this would be an entirely different race. And part of the reason, one of the things that we're trying to do is have these discussions. And I was really blown away by Ryan's op-ed, even though I disagree with nearly everything he said. I think it's even though as much as I want his candidate to win, I believe more, just as much, and if not more, in people having conversations. And one of the things that I have been so damn frustrated with this particular election cycle, since I became a Republican for Harrison out there, is the inability for people to have conversations. If I didn't have this podcast and the ability to talk with you, I would probably be swinging from the rafters right now because it's been such a frustrating cycle. And so what I want our list, what I would like people to understand from my perspective, not from yours, but just from my perspective and not speaking for you, is that conversation with Ryan Wilson is exactly what people need to see and they need to hear. They need to hear people have a reasonable conversation back and forth. Now, we can get into a whole bunch of other stuff when we talk about me going to Pennsylvania and things that I can feel, but it's important that we just in these conversations, even less than 2 weeks away, the election's 2 weeks from today, we're just mowing over people. And I don't want to do that. And so Ryan, I think, really staked out a thoughtful position. Yes, I don't think that if the Trump-Vance campaign was messaging on what Ryan Wilson was talking about, this would be a much different race. But I do believe that's why Ryan Wilson is supporting the Trump-Vance ticket. And he put pen to paper and articulated in the Star Tribune in response to what I wrote, a reason for he to do it. And that's the type of thing that should be elevated. You don't submit an op-ed. I didn't submit an op-ed to the Star Tribune and take this stance because I didn't want to have conversations with you, because
Right.
I didn't want to have discussions. And that conversation that we just had with Ryan Wilson, is exactly the type of thing that more people need to be doing. And I'm proud that we had him on the show.
I agree. And thank you for lining that up. I think it was also, it's look at the two of you. This is not even just a disagreement of things, but this was you guys obviously having a direct disagreement on this and being able to, I think it's always important to have just as many or more good things to say about your candidate than bad about the other. And so this was not about him coming on and swinging at Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, which, as somebody who just ran statewide, he easily could have taken his opportunity in the Star Tribune to take aim at Tim Walz. This was, he wanted to remind voters the good and the benefits that could come from this Trump-Vance administration. And it was refreshing. It was
Yep.
nice. It was great to hear from him. And like I said to him, and I will just say again, I hope it's not the last we hear from him, both on this podcast and in general, because we need more good, thoughtful, principled Republican leaders in this state who can take a stance on the issues and the policies and remind voters what the Republican Party can stand for.
Yes. 2 points. First of all, you blew it by getting him off the air by not asking that question.
I know.
That's just, for doing this almost 2 years, you really blew it.
Really
No,
blew
I'm
it.
just joking. The other thing I would say to you, though, is I know what else is going to happen here. I'm going to probably get some criticism, and I don't know that you will, but I think I will, for having a Trump-Vance supporter on the podcast and not hammering them more. Tough shit. It's not your podcast. Becky and I do this together, and we set the tone. One thing that I've tried to not do since I've become a Republican for Harris is use the podcast. I'm protective of this space, and I didn't want to. And so it's important for me that everyone comes on this podcast and treated with a respectful way. Ryan Wilson laid out a very thoughtful perspective, and Becky and I approach this from thoughtful perspectives. So Ryan Wilson was treated with respect, and we're going to do it with all our guests. And so I know there's going to be some criticism of me that I should have pounded him more on stuff. It's not the way I do things in this context on these shows. And I hope we get him back on. And if he comes back on, our first question needs to be, is he's going to run for office again? Because boy, oh boy, he did a really good job.
And I think you should be commended for that, because I do, over the last 2 years, the conversations we've had and the folks we've come on that we vehemently disagree with, left and center, we've never taken that approach. We've never been disrespectful and hammered anybody, regardless of how much we disagree with what they have said or what they stand for. I think that this is something that I appreciate, that despite your involvement and support of the Harris-Walz campaign, that you can still, this is exactly why we've been doing this, and we continue to say, and we'll continue to talk about it. But we need more of this, of just being able to have a freaking conversation and talk more about it. And so thank you for that. Thank you for having this space. Thank you for continuing to lead with that. And with that, I do want to chat a little bit about your involvement with the Harris campaign, because very exciting. You last week traveled to Pennsylvania, appeared on stage with fellow Republicans for Harris, including former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, other Republican Party leaders, party electeds, a whole plethora of folks. And you were on stage, you shook the hands, you met the vice president. And while I'm not a supporter, I don't agree with a lot of her policies, that's just really freaking cool. And so I want to talk about how this came to be and your experience, and go for it.
I've been as the listeners of our show should know by now, am a Republican for Harris. I endorsed Harris.
What?
Yes, big news breaking. Beep, beep, beep. I endorsed Harrison-Walz back in August, and I've been a proud Republican for Harris since that time. And we've talked about it on this podcast, and I've been participating in a lot of campaign organizing in this state, and been working to bring in Republicans and independents in this state and help in other parts of the country as best I can get Republicans and independents who want to support Harrison-Walz to feel included in the campaign. Couple points I would make. Number one, it's all volunteer, not paid to do this in any way, shape, or form. It's all volunteer work, and everything a part of this is volunteer. Number one. Number two, it is noticeable to me, and I think most people know, that the political climate is pretty tight right now. It's difficult, particularly in Minnesota, to be a Republican who's out there supporting Harrison-Walz. I have my reasons, and I'm comfortable being public for a variety of reasons. But there are a lot of people in a number of states who don't feel as comfortable speaking out, don't feel as comfortable. And I want to just acknowledge, particularly in this state, it is tough to be a Republican for Harris. We've got a dedicated coalition of Republicans that are helping out and being productive behind the scenes. So those opportunities led to an invitation to go to Pennsylvania last week. I knew I'd been going for a few days. Becky, you were one of the very few people that knew I was going. We recorded our last podcast episode, and I told you immediately after we recorded it that I was going to be heading to Pennsylvania. 99.9% of the people in my life did not know.
So honored.
And a number of people were, and so variety of reasons I did that. First of all, it's nobody's damn business, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, I always am a little careful about travel and things like that, letting people know where I am. And it's best that I just panel myself and just, there's a little bit of discretion about where I advertise where I'm going to be. So I flew out to Pennsylvania last Wednesday morning. I flew out, and the event was in Washington's Crossing in Pennsylvania. Absolutely unbelievable. Just absolutely gorgeous event out there. And let me just say to you something. I know that people disagree. A lot of people disagree with my decision, and this is going to be a very close race. I cannot begin to tell you, as someone who considers himself to be a homeless Republican, how much my spirit and faith in both democracy, the Republican Party, and this country was just refilled inside me after being in Pennsylvania in that event. I got to meet with some incredible thought leaders from inside the Republican Party from all across the country, and then had the opportunity to meet the vice president prior to the event, and then have a lot of great conversations with people. Bill Kristol was there. He and I spoke for a while. George Conway was there. Former Governor Christy Todd Whitman of New Jersey. You mentioned Adam Kinzinger was there. Just a whole host of people, and there, the former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia was there. And it was just an amazing group of people. And then to hear the speech, and I had the opportunity to be on stage during the speech, which I was not. That was amazing to go up on stage and be at that event on stage when she was giving that speech. I'm bad at estimating crowd size. I think there were 500-ish
You and
maybe.
Donald Trump both.
Yeah, I think,
Sorry.
yes. I think there were 500-ish in the neighborhood. Don't hold me to it. I think there were more than, I don't think there was 1,000. I think it was probably closer to 500, more than, I don't know. I want to be as precise as I can, but there were multiple hundreds of people there. And it was just an amazing place to be. It was in Pennsylvania, right on the Delaware, where Washington crossed the Delaware. I think he crossed from Pennsylvania over and then back. And so it was just remarkable historic place to be at. And the crowd that I was at, I think people sometimes misinterpret how much I believe in democracy, the rule of the law, and the Constitution, and following what I think is the right thing to do, regardless of what people think. And it was unbelievable to be on stage during that event, look across the crowd and see country over party, and see the people that I was on stage with, and see the vice president speak, and then hear the reaction from the crowd, and then coupled with all the conversations I had. It is an event that I will never forget, and it was a privilege and an honor to be there.
A couple questions for you. Starting with, had you ever had the opportunity in an intimate setting like that to meet a president or a vice president?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay.
I've met multiple presidents, and I have not met Biden, but I met George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, I met George Bush, I met Jimmy Carter, I met Bill Clinton.
Awesome.
I never met Biden. I was at an event that Obama was at, but this was my first time meeting the vice president.
Very good. I agree. The Constitution and constitutional Republicanness is really how the party won me over in the first place. And I really resonated. You talked about how the vice president did speak to the importance of preserving democracy, respecting the rule of law, and honoring the Constitution. And so it certainly resonates, and it resonates with myself, with Republicans in general. I'm curious of when you're at some of these events and interacting with some Harris staff and other folks, which obviously there's some Democrats mingled in within there. Are these individuals respectful of the fact that you're a Republican for Harris, or are they trying to win you over and pull you into becoming a full-on Democrat?
I have not had. First of all, let me say I have now. Growing up and following politics, I think most of us that follow politics understand the phrase kind of Reagan Democrats. There were a lot of Reagan Democrats in 80, particularly 84, that helped give him a decisive reelection. I have never seen, and I've done some coalition work before with the Republican Party. I've never seen a more organized coalition like this before. Not to say that it hasn't happened in other campaigns, but I haven't seen one like this. And I will tell you that in every one of my conversations with representatives, first of all, the Harris campaign does have a paid Republican for Harris coalition person. Every person that I've been in contact with has been respectful and appreciative of the fact that I'm a Republican. There has been no there's been no bullying or like name calling or just even and I don't want to be dramatic with that phraseology, but even just needling.
Right.
It's all been appreciation. And as we do it on this podcast, there can be some kind of partisan jabs back and forth. None of that. In fact, the Minnesota staff and the Minnesota people that I've had the opportunity to interface with have been they have absolutely taken me as I am and been willing to work and be helpful in lanes that I feel comfortable. The event on a Wednesday, it was obviously the vice president is a Democrat, and there was a lot of staff from the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth. I need to remember. I had to remind myself to remember to say Commonwealth a few times. They were just remarkable, kind and appreciative. Because let me say something to you. I have never been at an event that there was more security. And there's a reason for that. Vice president was there, but there are a broad there the people that were there that day, independent of myself, are really staking a claim on where they believe this election is going to go. And it's not easy. I would encourage people to look at my DMs, my emails, and some of the texts that I've received. This is a much harder, this has been the focus and intensity that I've received from Republicans for doing this, particularly those in other states that know that I'm in Minnesota, has been more than I would have ever expected. I still would have done it, but the reality is that it's not easy to be a Republican for Harris and then walk out on stage or be at an event like that. There is some pressure to fall in line, and particularly in this hyper partisan time. But I stand by what I did and I stand by what I believe in. And I know I made the right decision, independent of what happens in the election. I worked on a lot of campaigns where I didn't think the candidate was going to win. And I stand by my position related to this race. It's going to be a flip of a coin until election day. But Becky, I have to just say that it was without a doubt the most patriotic, enthusiastic moment that I've ever been a part of.
Good. I'm glad to have you share that. And I assumed that was the case when it came to folks involved with the Democratic Party and the campaign, that they were being respectful and understanding that you and the others involved are that this is a unique situation of a coalition of Republicans, both of in notable name that you listed off a bunch there, and just Republican voters across the country here. It's really unfortunate that folks within our party are taking aim at you and others. I have to imagine that's the same case for the former electeds and other party officials as well, that are getting similar emails and DMs. And it's really sad and unfortunate that's where we are. But it's the beauty of this country, right? That you can have your opinions and you can vote for who you want and you can make your voice heard. And whether people agree with you or not, I think that we should all remember that's what these elections are about. And this is what this country was founded on. And so, bravo for sticking it out, for being out there and continuing to push forward, because it's not easy. And I'm sure every day you get knocked down a little bit. So, continue doing it and fighting the good fight.
A couple other points I just want to make. It was nerve wracking a bit to understand why all the security was there. It was pretty nerve. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it. And not to get into specifics, but I felt very safe. A couple other things I'd like to point out. I did not tell people that I was going, aside from Becky, you of course knew, but I did not tell people I was there until I tweeted out that I was there. And my phone blew up like it was unbelievable. It was going off unbelievably. And then I didn't shut it off when I went on stage. And then it was even going crazier because I was on stage, what I
Mhm.
was not expecting.
Invisible.
Invisible. The one other thing I would just say, my dad passed away a few years ago. This would be the type of moment where my dad would call me and be like, "Hey, Michael, do you know you're on TV?" you're on TV right now. And I'd be like, yes, Dad, I know the camera's right there. So I missed, this would be the type of thing that he would call about, but family knew I was there. Becky, you knew that I was there. It was a very short trip to Philadelphia. But I have to say, a lot of Eagle stuff there that I didn't feel comfortable with, but it was a wonderful time. And I had a wonderful time. And if there's ever a time for anyone to go to Pennsylvania, that part of the country, it was an incredibly historic place. Washington Crossings was wonderful. It was a day trip there and back. And boy, were my arms tired.
You didn't get a chance to get a cheesesteak while you were there?
I didn't. I didn't have a ton of time and flew there, flew back, and it was a wonderful time. And I just want to note on that point, I'm going to shamelessly do something plug. Former Congressman Joe Walsh is coming to Minnesota this week. Becky, we have a ticket for you if you want to come. There's going to be a Republican for Harris event this week. Congressman Joe Walsh is going to be there. Follow me on social media. I'll share the link. But Becky, there's plenty of I guarantee you, right up front, if you want to come.
All right, I'll keep
Republicans
you
for Harris.
posted.
No, but I appreciate, first of all, my ability to trust you and not leaking it out that I was going, but then also your support. And as you've been so kind during this podcast of just giving me some freedom and some liberty to not abuse this space, but to talk about the experiences that I'm having.
And like I said, while I'm not a personal supporter of the vice president, I think anytime
Yet.
you have the opportunity to meet a sitting elected, a former president, vice president, somebody who is in one of the most powerful positions in the country is amazing and astonishing and should be applauded. So
Thank you.
yes, absolutely. Let's get into a little bit of drama though. McDonald's. First of all, McDonald's is my jam. I'm a Diet Coke gal. McDonald's has the best Diet Coke around. Their French fries are next to none. I love McDonald's breakfast. It got me through my first pregnancy. It is just a joy and I applaud everything that comes with McDonald's. But
Becky, I have to say something. I've listened to your voice for a number of years. You really, I can tell you talk about McDonald's the same way you talk about your family. I mean,
to be honest,
boy, that was, yes, I could tell. You really love the Golden Arches.
I do. I certainly do. But I did not, it was not on my bingo card to have presidential race drama surrounding McDonald's. Let's break it down a little bit. It all kind of hinges on the fact that Kamala Harris says that she briefly worked at the chain during the summer of 1983 while she was a student at Howard University. Trump has continuously accused her of lying when it comes to that. He recently said it was a big part of her resume that she worked at McDonald's, how tough of a job it was. She made French fries and she talked about the heat. It's so tough. She never worked at McDonald's. That's Donald Trump quoting. So
she worked at McDonald's.
In the last couple of days, Donald Trump, quote unquote, worked at McDonald's. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what we saw from Donald Trump in the Trump campaign?
Donald Trump went to and I want to just tell you a couple of things. First of all, great politics. I get it. I understand it. Let me say this to you. One of the things that I think you and I have tried to keep ourselves honest about is that we recognize and can offer analysis and opinions independent of our positions, like where we are personally, that we can call balls and strikes. Anyone who thinks that this wasn't a good PR move for him to do doesn't understand politics. The number of people and so he went and worked at a McDonald's for a day. Now, worked in a sense that it was an event and he was there working the drive-through, but the optics and the visuals were great. He was making fries. He was making fries and working the drive-through.
He put it down. He shucked the fries. He put them in the red liners. And Trump is also rather notorious in his love for McDonald's. He has had many campaign photos from Air Force One having his French fries and sodas, and he likes McDonald's too.
I'm going to bring something up to you. I've had McDonald's twice since he did that because I just craving it. I love McDonald's. And I thought it was, and so I understand the PR political theater aspect of it. And the visuals were great. Now, let me point something out to you. I understood that he wasn't really working, I understood, he's the former president of the United States.
Right.
I didn't believe that he was working an actual drive-through, like people were driving in, and I shared some information. There are a lot of people, I remember Michael Dukakis being in a tank. I never said to myself, oh my God, the governor of Massachusetts is behind it, is driving a tank right now. There could be missiles and machine guns in there. I never, or I don't know what's in a tank, shells or
Right.
whatever. I never believed that. So I understand it's impossible to think that in this day and age that some random person just showed up at McDonald's. That's not the way it works. The number of people that were just like, he's not working at McDonald's. Well, let me tell you something. He had the apron on, he was working the fry machine, he was working at McDonald's. Okay. I want to be as fair as I can. And my God, do those fries look good.
And I appreciate that because people surrounding the event talked about how the customers were pre-selected, they were wanded, their cars were searched. Well, duh. Like it, there we first of
Isn't
all
it?
have just recently had 2 attempts on the president's life. People have the ability to hold whatever they want in their car, whether legal or illegal. Like they're just going to let some random cars and somebody who potentially has some, I don't know, bucket of acid or gun in their car that can be like, oh, hey, Donald Trump, thanks for your fries. Bang. It's just wild to think that people were up in arms that this was staged and selected. Things have changed so much, but like in 2012, when I worked in the Wisconsin on the Romney campaign, I mean, anybody, whether it was Mitt Romney or his wife or Paul Ryan or his wife,
It's
anytime
Speaker
they were
Ryan, okay?
speaker, he was not speaker at the time. Was
Oh, he
he? No, he
wasn't.
wasn't.
Yeah, he
He
was
wasn't speaker.
Speaker.
No, not until 2016,
What was he
2015.
at the time?
He was just
Congress?
he was the chair of Ways and Means, I think.
In the due
So,
respect.
the chairman. But anytime that they were in town, if they were stopping at a juice bar, that juice bar was vetted. They knew if there were tax liens on that. They knew if there was a criminal background of any of the owners or like managers. Like those things, they don't
Yes.
just go and stop by anything. They know the ins and outs of everybody associated with the company, the building, the land. They do it all. McDonald's did put out a statement because McDonald's is very notable for their being franchise operated. They said, as we've seen, our brand has been a fixture of conversation this election cycle. While we've not sat it, it's a testament to how much McDonald's resonates with so many Americans. McDonald's does not endorse candidates for elected office, and that remains true in the race for president. We're not red or blue, we're golden. Bravo to these comm staffers. That is beautifully done, wonderful, and it is. It is. McDonald's is just as American as apple pie. It's a funny little thing. It was a good move for him. He got days and days of credit out of this. And hey, some of these low propensity voters, they, right. That's who they're talking to. That's their game. That's their end all be all right now. I bet you there's some folks that see him at McDonald's and are like, "That's my president."
Yep. And let me just say to you, as someone who just went to a presidential event in Pennsylvania, they do background checks on everyone. And it's good to know that I can pass a background check.
There you go.
That's one of the plus things.
Congratulations. So proud of
Yes.
you.
And so they can pass. So they do background checks. And I think you would have lost respect for me if I'd come on the podcast here today and said it was all theater. Of course it's theater. It's great theater. And for people that were all wound up about it, I get it. I know, but come on, folks. You know what? Dukakis wasn't a tank. There weren't shells. It wasn't a machine gun. That stuff happens.
Yeah.
Politics is theater. And by the way, the probably, and we've talked about PR blunders before. That statement from McDonald's, I have saved. It is an absolute
It's so good.
home run. We are not red, white, or blue. We are golden. Whoever came up with that statement, A plus, home
Yeah.
run, grand slam.
Needs to be taught.
If you could just fix the ice cream machines, now you'd be great. But again, and here's the other thing. It made me hungry for McDonald's. I've had
Yeah.
McDonald's twice.
I love it.
I'll probably have it again now.
And I also, last thing I want to say is about when you mentioned passing the background checks. Can you imagine in this day and age? We've seen it all the time. Somebody goes viral on TikTok for some random thing. And the next thing we know their entire criminal record and whether they've paid their taxes and how often they voted. Can you imagine some person that just comes through a drive through and he interacts with and then says, "Have a great day." And then it's Trump wishes former felon who abused 12 kids having a great day. There's a reason there's parameters around this, not only for the safety, but because of the PR aspect. And certainly did not have McDonald's and all this hubbub surrounding it on my bingo card for this year. They keep us on our toes, man.
And it makes me want to have McDonald's. Again, I'm probably going to have it again. I'm so hungry for it. It was smart.
What's your order?
I've been the last I'm a Big Mac, and fries and a Coke guy. I love the fries. You got to eat them right away.
Yep.
And by the way, I'm a Coke guy. I hate diet soda. I would rather drink toilet water than diet soda.
Well,
I
I feel the
cannot
same
stand.
about the pure sugar that is
It's good for you.
Coca-Cola.
It's what built America.
Sure.
By the way, just one last point on the pie, because you said it's American as apple pie or something. I was in Hawaii a year and a half ago. Remember when McDonald's pies used to be deep fried?
Mhm.
The McDonald's franchises in Hawaii still deep fry their apple pies, not this baked
Interesting.
garbage that you get right now.
Cool.
And when I was in Hawaii, we made sure to hit the McDonald's a few times to get some of those
I
pies
like
because,
that.
my goodness, they're great. Boiling hot, but oh God, now I want McDonald's again.
Before I move on, I do have to have you tried the chicken Big Mac?
No, I've not officially. Let me say this to you. Tried, got some advice not to do it, tried, and
I've
it
heard
was
it's fine.
not a good experience.
Yep.
So haven't completed, started, tried. That was after getting advice that it was not the right thing to do, but I, of course, have to learn mistakes by myself. Far too much chicken, not enough sauce.
Yep.
Let's not mess with the streak. The Big Mac is just where
If it
you
ain't
should be.
broken, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
Speaking of my favorite things, I like to win. And currently, I had a really good week in our football league. Whoop. That's my first bullet in our show notes under football.
Did you have a good week? Where are we at right now?
Yes, I did have a good week. For the record, me and my husband both had great picks this week. He did bet
Oh,
against the
interesting.
Vikings and came out successful on that. But
Jeez.
I will say, so we both came in with 11 correct picks this week. Your wife,
Interesting.
Mrs. Brodkorb, really came in strong with a 10, and you came in with a very humble 9, so not too shabby, but it was enough to close the gap. Michael Brodkorb and Becky Scherr are officially tied for 4th place. It is going to come down to it, ladies and gentlemen.
It's going to come flip of a coin, just like this election.
Flip of a coin.
Yes, there may or may not be some colluding with some other owners that I am about coming up with some household rules regarding, we're going to call it like the sheer policy. I've been watching things a little closely. Some algorithms seem to be off a little bit. So
What?
we're going to start factoring in some
Never.
things. Becky, if
Do
there's
not
one thing,
even. I do not
Becky,
cheat.
if there's one thing that I cannot do is lose fairly, okay? And so I have to I can't lose fairly. No, I was great. It was frustrating to watch. And you and your husband are both a good sport. I will say, been cursing your husband more than this season. And I'm like getting mad. Like, it's right there. It's right there. And then he picks the Lions.
I know.
At least you picked the Vikings.
I decided that I'm sticking strong. The Vikings have been doing great things. It was a very frustrating end of the game. I will say I did take a nap during part of the game because my child napped and I had not gotten a night. He has a cold again. And so the night's sleep before was not very great. And I went to bed and the Vikings were winning and I came back and they were losing and it was not great. Exciting end, but what can you do?
We are going to have to make sure that we get some type of championship trophy for whoever wins. It might be me because I won last year, but I want to make sure that all the participants get some form of, that we bestow some honor on the winner, even if it is someone from your household.
Perfect. Got to make a quick plug. Are you familiar with the show The League? Have you watched that?
Sure I am.
They have a pretty epic couple trophies in that show. So maybe we can take some
Yes.
pointers.
Yes,
Or
but-
there's an episode of Friends where they have a really good troll trophy as well. I've got some thoughts in the matter we can discuss offline.
We'll talk about it all time. Becky, I want to thank you for doing this again this week. We're going to try to squeak in another bonus episode this week, but we have a busy week, but I hope to do it, okay?
Sounds great.
We want to thank you for listening to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky may return again this week. Have a wonderful time. Thanks for
Bye.
listening.